Have you ever listened to someone talking about statins or cholesterol and wondered what planet they're from? Today we're going to look at some real head scratchers. Stay tuned. Today I'm going to go over opinions by medical researchers and practicing doctors that masquerade as facts. Now, I'm going to do my best to not take things out of context, and for the sake of argument, I'm going to accept the statistics that they use to back up these opinions. I've also scrubbed the names of the doctors, though if you're really interested, you can follow the links and read the papers and see their names. So let's get started. First, from a paper entitled, "What is the role for treatment of hyperlipidemia in the primary prevention patient?" Hyperlipidemia, elevated lipids, somewhat synonymous with hypercholesterolemia. What really caught my attention in this is that they categorized 146 milligrams per deciliter, which is about 3.77 millimoles per liter, total cholesterol as being elevated. Now, this was based on a gentleman without known history of prior medical problems, and he underwent routine blood work, revealing an elevated total cholesterol level of these levels. That's the way they worded it. My best case interpretation reading the entire article is that maybe they meant LDL cholesterol, but if so, this indicates very shoddy editing in a journal of this kind. This was a case of a patient who was later discovered to have a very serious heart condition, which was kind of the point of the article. They were saying he shouldn't have bypassed the opportunity to take statins in favor of lifestyle changes. But if this presentation is accurate, that his total cholesterol was really 146, then this is a case of low cholesterol not being safe. You say that people with low cholesterol get heart attacks too. Well, that's the case. So they called it elevated instead, possibly. So this is either a sloppy editing mistake or a case of them trying to gaslight us. The next head-scratching opinion is in this paper, "Statins, what happens to patients who stop them after side effects?" And the claim is a 1.7% reduction, a 4-year number needed to treat of 59, in negative outcomes, which is what we're trying to avoid, the negative outcomes, is a very effective therapy. Now, this was based on researchers who studied 28,000 patients in Massachusetts, found that 30% stopped taking statins after experiencing side effects. The statistics they gave here was 8.5% of the people who stopped taking statins had a cardiovascular event within 4 years. 7.6% of those who continued taking statin had a cardiovascular event within 4 years. Now, that's only a difference of 0.9%, but they did consider other outcomes, and when they considered everything, it came out to a 1.7% difference. I'm not going to argue about that. 1.7% difference in negative outcomes. A prominent Cleveland Clinic cardiologist said that that's a very significant number. Those kinds of numbers are typically what we see for very effective therapies. And he went on to say, in other words, 59 of these patients would need to continue taking statins for 4 years to prevent one case of heart attack, stroke, or death. So at least they're dealing with absolute risk reduction, so that was good in NTs. The only figures I can go with this is the 7.6% versus the 8.5%, which is a 0.9% absolute risk reduction. That is a relative risk reduction of about 11%. So just let's look at that. The treatment fails to protect 89% of the people who would have had a heart attack if left untreated. And that's said to be very effective. I have no argument with saying that statins have some effect, but in what world are numbers like these very effective? The problem is that when we use terms like very effective, it can mislead patients into thinking they're protected far more than they are, which may lead some patients to be less vigilant about their lifestyles. When you're told, oh, take this statin, it's going to protect you. It's not going to protect 8 out of 9 people, at least from this study. And that's a problem in messaging as much as it is a problem in the therapy itself. And again, like I've said before, a relative risk reduction tells you how effective the medication is. Absolute risk reduction tells you how effective the therapy is, or the use of that medication. The difference being that the medication is given to a lot of people that it's not going to benefit because we're not very good at figuring out who is really going to have a heart attack over the next time frame, whatever that time frame is. So the next head scratcher, effectiveness of statins as primary prevention in people with different cardiovascular risk. And in this article, we can deduce that they believe that a therapy with the number needed to treat of 75 will benefit most patients. And this is the way they worded it. We found that statin treatment effectively reduced relative risk in the 7.5 to 9.9% category with a number needed to treat of 75. And despite that, most individuals with an estimated risk in this range could benefit from statin treatment. Well, if 1 out of 75, that is a 5-year number needed to treat, which comes out to about 38 for a 10-year number needed to treat. And I don't try extrapolating past 10 years for any of these because things just change too much and it becomes meaningless. But how is 1 out of 75 or 1 out of 38 most? From my definition, when I was a kid in school, most meant more than half at the very least. 1/75 of the patients are going to get a benefit from taking the statin. The benefit being avoiding a negative outcome. This is so far from most patients. I don't see how these statements go unchallenged by mainstream medicine. It just baffles me. Now, they may argue that they get other benefits. They get benefit of lower cholesterol, but a benefit of lower cholesterol is totally meaningless if a person still has a heart attack. And if they weren't going to have a heart attack, then the cholesterol doesn't make a difference. So that argument really doesn't hold water with me. Next article, this is actually an online article. Is it time to put statins in the drinking water? I've addressed this before. I apologize that I don't have a pithy, quick little saying to summarize this. I just have to put up what was in this article. When patients have asked me over the years, this is a doctor writing, about the safety of statins, I have half jokingly, the term half jokingly really means half seriously also, suggested that they should be put in the drinking water. This is what I took it to mean, that the doctor knows it's not practical, but if it was practical, they'd be all for it. And just look at the next statement. Though we are not yet to the point where anyone is advocating putting these medications in the drinking water, that word "yet" in that sentence means that he expects that it may happen someday. We may get mass distribution of these sorts of drugs, perhaps over the counter, which I'll get to in a few minutes. Then he talks about some parts of the world, there's been serious talk about giving everyone a poly pill of statin, aspirin, and blood pressure lowering. The idea being to put everybody on these pills. Well, who benefits in that case? Well, Big Pharma benefits for sure because they get a lot of sales and they're probably sales to government so they can overcharge them more than they overcharge us. Is that where we've come to in society? This kind of dystopian future is upon us where we all just take drugs and forget trying to live healthy lives? That seems to be where some doctors think we ought to be headed. So in this next article, doctor argues for aggressively lowering LDL cholesterol. He basically said LDL can never be too low. And this is the same Cleveland cardiologist who, by the way, I actually do have a lot of respect for a lot of his opinions and a lot of the work he's done because he has prevented some very dangerous drugs or been part of preventing some very dangerous drugs from getting on the market. I disagree with his position on statins. I just wish he would open his mind on that one. He says, we have pretty good data from multiple trials, including some that we have run, that show there are no real safety issues with low LDL. And he goes on to say, we used to say you can't be too rich or too thin. We now say you can't be too rich, too thin, or have too low an LDL. I don't know about being too rich. That's a financial, not a health condition. But too thin, of course you can be too thin. And too low LDL, yeah, that can be bad too. Extremely low cholesterol levels can impair hormone synthesis. LDL carries fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, and too little LDL could potentially reduce the transport of these essential vitamins. Some studies suggest that very low LDL levels may be linked to an increased risk of hemorrhagic stroke. Cholesterol is necessary for brain function, and some research has hinted that extremely low cholesterol could be associated, maybe it's not causal, we don't know yet, with an increased risk of anxiety, depression, or cognitive decline. Now, I believe that cognitive issues that many people suffer while on statins is due to the cholesterol lowering effect, not necessarily kind of a direct effect of these statins doing something wrong, but the effect of statins doing what they're intended to do, which is lower cholesterol. A lot of mood problems, a lot of temper problems. I think these are all caused by the lowering of cholesterol. That's just my tentative opinion. I would like to see more research in this area. From an article entitled, Why I Think It's Time to Make Statins Available Over the Counter. There are two claims in here. First, the claim of the title that statins should be made available over the counter and that statins are safer than Tylenol. I had trouble deciding which part of this article was more egregious, the claim that statins should be made available over the counter or that they're safer than Tylenol. Now, I've covered both of these in other videos, so I'm just going to touch on the main points here. The first assertion, they should be over the counter, is based on a study of a single dose of one particular statin, that was rosuvastatin, and it was at least partly funded by the manufacturer, AstraZeneca. I admit I don't know to what extent it was funded. It showed a 12% relative risk reduction or a 0.5% absolute risk reduction in cardiovascular deaths and a 23% relative risk increase, which was a 1.1% absolute risk increase in muscle pain. Comparing death to muscle pain is not one for one, but there's a lot of other adverse effects to consider and these very low numbers to consider. So the doctor says in this, one interesting aspect of the study is that cholesterol levels were not used to select patients or to guide treatment. The requirement was simply age and one heart disease risk factor. That's the formula for an over-the-counter medication. You don't need a lot of fancy measurements to figure out if you could benefit from the statin. People are going to self-diagnose and decide, I need a statin. On the matter of safety of statins as opposed to Tylenol, consider we're talking about an over-the-counter drug that should be taken intermittently. You know, you've got a headache, you take some Tylenol or whatever. I mean, I know people take it probably more than they should. I only take it if I've pulled a muscle or something of that sort, and then it's only for a couple of days. So I take very little Tylenol. You're comparing that usage against a chemical that we're going to put into our bodies every day until the end of our lives. And you're telling me that one with all these known adverse effects is safer than the one that's for occasional use? Just doesn't make sense to me. Now I'm going to get into some personal stories, so I don't have any references to show you. These are just things I remember doctors telling me in my statin journey. First one, if you don't get side effects on a low dose, you don't get them on a higher dose. A cardiologist actually told me this. I had gone to him because I was having problems with shortness of breath, which turned out to be an adverse effect of the statins that I was on. But neither one of us recognized that at the moment. So when he asked me as I was walking out, oh, do you get any adverse effects? And I said, well, no, not that I know of. And he said, well, you should increase the dose because if you don't get them on the low dose, you won't get them on the higher dose. How a trained medical professional could make a statement like that in the face of all the evidence just absolutely baffles me. The next one was a physician's assistant telling me when I had said I'm not able to exercise as well as I could, and by this time I had made the connection with the statins and I was trying to get permission, like I thought I needed it, to stop taking them. His response was, maybe you shouldn't exercise as hard anymore. Seriously, this medication you're giving me prevents me from exercising, so the solution is to decrease my exercise intensity? I wasn't put on statins due to any identified cardiovascular disease or even a high calculated risk, but entirely because a doctor had decided that I had high cholesterol, and that was entirely it. My head wanted to explode when I heard this. Statins don't cause that, was referring to brain fog. I was in an argument with the original doctor who put me on statins saying that I was having cognitive effects. Her response was, well, statins don't cause that. That's a common response we'll hear all the time from doctors who just don't want to deal with it. They want to basically gaslight us into believing that that's not what's happening. Cognitive effects are very real. Even the FDA has mandated warnings about that in the inserts for the statins. And finally, this same doctor told me your body will adjust and you'll learn to tolerate the adverse effects. Well, this reminds me of an incident that happened when I was in college. I was on a college track team, so I didn't do a lot of drinking of alcohol, but I was at one of these campus parties, and of course, the alcohol was flowing freely in that case. And one of my track buddies handed me a beer and said, hey, have a beer. And I handed it back to him. I said, I don't like beer. I just don't like the taste. He says, well, you develop a taste for it. And I said, what about the part about throwing up afterwards? He said, oh, you get used to that. This was analogous to what this doctor was telling me. You'll get used to the pain and you'll learn to tolerate it. That's not the way I'm going to live my life. The way these drugs are being pushed on it just baffles me. So for my closing thoughts, it's important to recognize that these statements are just opinions pretending to be some sort of scientific truth. And unfortunately, most patients accept them as such. I've been reading a lot of comments on various social media, and I see people everywhere saying how much better off they are because their cholesterol is lower. Not that they feel better, not that their quality of life is better, but simply because of the lower cholesterol itself, and an drug-induced lower cholesterol at that. My fear is that people are going to think that they have a much higher level of protection than they really do from taking a statin, and they may ignore more effective changes in lifestyle. Let's face it, we all know people make comments like, I could never give up X. X may be beer, X may be smoking, X may be potato chips, X may be bread or potatoes. And conversely, people worried about high cholesterol when they give us figures that most of us would consider normal or healthy. One person, who could very well have been a lean mass hyperresponder, commented about how a low-carb, high-fat diet didn't work for them. It raised their cholesterol. Of course, without details, it's hard to tell if they really are a lean mass hyperresponder, but that's just an example of how pervasive this blind high is bad and low is good thinking is. And to be honest, I don't respond to those comments when I see them on an ad. There's a saying, though: never try to teach a pig to sing. It frustrates you and it annoys the pig. So people have to suspect something is amiss in what they've been told before they can be helped. So that's why I'm not trying to teach them to sing. So what can we do then? Well, we've got to be aware of opinions pretending to be truth and keep learning in order to protect ourselves and our loved ones. And if we're honest, we'll keep open minds and adjust our beliefs in light of new evidence. I just wish some of our doctors would do that. So that's what I've got on this topic. If you appreciate this content, please like, share, subscribe, and comment on this or other topics you'd like me to cover. And if you haven't seen this video, I recommend you take a look at it now. Thanks for listening.